Hi everybody, I'm laying out a plan to end the internet as we know it.
How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Distant Thrall. So previously we did a full video explaining net neutrality, and now we're back because we need to explain some points people have been making that are for net neutrality. We feel like people are being deceived by the media and by politicians, so we're here to kind of explain these main points that people are making. So we're going to kick it off here.
Yeah, so the thing that kind of got us started on this was some videos put out by the Young Turks. We'll lead off with this one clip.
Also by Obama, but we're going to start off with the Young Turks.
Yeah, absolutely. Put out by, so this was in response to a clip by Napolitano appearance on Fox News.
You know, for them to call it net neutrality is Orwellian at its height, because it is not neutral. It is not neutral. He basically wants to take the choice of buyers and sellers out of the market.
That's exactly what net neutrality does. It protects the internet so that those cable companies can't come in and go, all right, you're my competitor. Oh, sorry, you're in the slow lane. Your website hardly works at all. I've slowed it down to a crawl so nobody uses it. Or you can't pay me the extraordinary amount that I want that a larger company can. I'm going to give them monopoly power and I'm going to kill your company. Okay, see, that's not neutral. That's like your opinion, man.
Yeah, so what Napolitano said was actually a really good point, because net neutrality is very misleading, but politicians do this all the time. They create these really misleading names for bills in order to throw the public off.
Yeah, so, like 180 degrees. So if a bill is going to do one thing, it's going to be named as if it does the exact opposite. Which is
the exact case in this situation, because net neutrality does not create any neutrality within the net at all. It's a completely misleading name, and it's just not good. It's really throwing the public for a loop.
Another thing that he said in that video was he was talking about, he was just an argument from exaggeration. He was like, they're going to slow access to certain sites down to a crawl so you can't access it. To get to this point, you have to completely ignore any market forces. You have to ignore any sense of customers that are paying for your internet. If I'm paying for internet and my ISP who I'm paying is slowing my access down to anything to a crawl to the point where I can't use it, they're no longer my ISP.
Well, that's what you would like to do.
Right.
But that's what we can't do right now, because whenever they keep on saying that there's a free market for internet right now, it's total bullshit. There is no free market. If an ISP is slowing your internet down right now, you have maybe one other option, and it's already a crappy internet service provider to begin with. So you know you're not going to have a better option.
It's probably, if you're with the #1 ISP, your only other option is like the #2 largest ISP in the country, who's probably going to be doing the same stuff.
Yeah. So your options are very limited.
For almost a century, our law has recognized that companies who connect you to the world have special obligations not to exploit the monopoly they enjoy over access in and out of your home or business. That's also very important because it makes those providers, the ISPs, a public utility. So, for example, a phone company is a public utility. So they can't say, hey, if you're with us at AT&T and somebody that has Verizon as a service calls you, we won't allow that call to go through. No. This is a very important public service that you're doing, and you have to be fair and equal in treatment of everyone else using that service. So he's saying the same rules should apply to the internet providers.
So there's 2 points that need to be discussed here. One is the quote, Obama's quote, monopoly about the last mile of connectivity from the ISP to your house, and the other one is this idea of forcing public utilities to interconnect, to work together to serve you, in whatever product they offer. So the point that needs to be made, and is missed by almost every news source so far, is that this monopoly over that last mile of cable, of connectivity between the ISP and your house, this monopoly that these large companies have over that, only exists because of the government. So right now, when we're discussing this as a problem requiring net neutrality laws and regulations, which I hate calling it net neutrality because it's not it. We're just using words that are fed to us. So the case for government regulation of the internet, using this last mile monopoly thing is basically saying we have a problem created by people running to the government to get kind of corporatist, monopolistic control over parts of our internet service. So we have this problem created by, people running to the government. And now we're going to try and solve it by, again, running to the government and asking for more regulations and more interference in competition. So rather than kind of increasing competition, reducing government interference to give more choices to the customer. And the perfect example is what we just talked about. You probably only have 1 or 2 major ISPs for wherever you live. And if you don't like what you got, you're stuck. You can't switch. And this is kind of the backbone, I think, of the whole issue that net neutrality is trying to solve. And we'll get to more on that later. Yeah. So the second thing is the interconnectivity from public utilities. So if you classify this thing as a public utility, now by law, they're forced to work with other companies that would normally be a competitor and not block their competitors. So the example is like a phone, like an old school phone company that he just gave, where if you have a phone service and your friend has phone service, then those 2 phone companies have to allow you to talk to one another, even though they're competing with one another. This is not something that you need the government to create. It's called a term.
Consumer-driven.
Yeah, exactly. So a common term for this is called cooperation. That's what it's called. So when you have 2 companies in a free market that will cooperate to a point for the purposes of better serving their customers. So the idea is that we need the government to force this kind of cooperation amongst ISPs on the internet. But the thing is, the whole internet is already a bunch of competitors cooperating to provide connectivity amongst themselves, between themselves. So we're fixing something that isn't broken in that regard.
Yeah, another good example that I brought up was your like roaming charges and stuff like that, and long distance charges. We don't even see that anymore. We used to see it all the time, early days of cell phones, where people would get charged for roaming or trying to call someone across the entire world. Now we just think that's ridiculous, and we thought it was ridiculous at the time, and that's why these cell phone providers have just totally eliminated that, because they've realized it was ridiculous, and they realized what the consumers actually wanted. They didn't want to pay for those ridiculous rates, so they just ended up getting rid of it completely.
Yeah, and that's continuing. So, you used to, pay for mobile minutes between one mobile phone and another mobile phone inside AT&T. Yeah. And then AT&T said, well, you can call any AT&T customer for free. And now you can call any mobile customer for free, almost no matter what company you're with. Right. And sooner or later, I think, we're moving closer and closer to kind of an unlimited minutes now. And all this is not driven by phone neutrality. Yeah. All of this is driven by consumers wanting it to work a certain way. Yeah.
It's an evolution of the service.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now we're going to go on to the Young Turks talking about kind of why Obama made the decision to go ahead and speak out about net neutrality again. And he's trying to make the case that it was because these big internet companies are now backing net neutrality and are throwing money at him to try and get net neutrality passed.
What changed recently was some of the huge internet companies like Google, using their mighty power, Facebook, came in and said, after being on the sidelines for a long time, Google came in and said, yeah, we're in favor of net neutrality. We oppose what the ISPs are doing. What is this?
Yeah. So
what does all that mean to you?
Basically, what Google and Facebook are doing here, well, like you were saying, what Google is doing here is they're seeing that 4 million people figure that are sending in stuff in support of net neutrality. And since they're such a large company with a lot of products, they really want to ride that wave of public opinion so that they stay on everybody's good side. They've done this time and time again. You can't really even get a read of what their stance is, because they don't really have a stance. They're essentially a flip-flopping company. They just want to go in the way of everybody else. They just want to make everybody happy.
Yeah, like Facebook. Yeah, Facebook should be really terrified right now. Yeah. They're like one big bad media blitz away from non-existence.
Right.
At least I think in this country, I think most people here are looking for an excuse to get away from them.
They definitely have a very staunch competition.
Yeah, and if they piss off the internet,
right,
Facebook's probably on its way out.
Yeah, so Facebook's kind of on its last leg. So it really wants to take advantage of every opportunity it can get to be in the public's favor.
Yeah, and I would say like the internet in its mass ignorance is definitely pro net neutrality.
And to not take a stance on something that's so important to the internet is pretty foolish of them not to take advantage of.
Agreed. So the last four things are kind of the four biggest arguments for net neutrality, and we want to quickly just run through the counter arguments. Now, again, we did a complete hour and something minute long, just detailed, fine dissection of all this stuff. So if you want to get all the facts, if you want to get the full arguments and really dive into kind of the philosophy behind this, as well as like a free market, less government, more competition solution, please check out our other video. But let's just run down the arguments really quick.
So the first thing is people are really worried about monopolies forming, mostly in these internet service companies like YouTube and stuff like that. If they're given prioritization, any competition they have will not have a chance against them. It's creating a monopoly.
Yeah, so you know, the Facebook is another. Let's use that example again. So Facebook has all the money; it's got all the users right now. Let's say a Facebook competitor pops up tomorrow, but it can't compete because its website is too slow in comparison to Facebook, who can afford to pay for fast lane access. Well, that's a fear, right? They don't want these monopolies popping up. So I would say my first response is to that. Instead of worrying about these potential, not currently existing, fast lanes and monopolies, I think we should be worrying about the monopolies that actually do exist already. And again, we're talking about that last mile monopoly, the ISPs, that based on your geographic location, you have no choice. You can't vote with your money. You can't leave an ISP who has bad customer service or bad practices or throttles services that you don't like, which they currently do, like BitTorrent and things like that. A lot of ISPs do interfere with your connection. So you really can't leave bad ISPs now because of a monopoly that already exists. So let's handle that first. Let's get rid of the monopoly that is real now and watch the effects that it has on competition so I guess the case against this is if you have more ISPs, you're going to prevent these fast lane monopolies. So if my ISP is speeding up Bing on the fast lane, Bing.com, and I want to use Google, and I have another ISP that I can switch to that's going to give me just the same speed and just the same service, but they're not going to throttle websites that I want to use, I'm going to switch.
Right.
Yeah. So
that could actually happen if there was a more free market.
Yeah. So the free choice that we would have without this monopoly that does exist would prevent the monopolies that people are pro net neutrality to prevent.
Yeah, and what you're going to find with most of these points is that net neutrality has absolutely no solution to any of these problems. It's just because of the name and because of how it's being presented, you think that it's got a solution, but it's just very deceiving. It doesn't have any solution for any of these problems. So the next point is actually the freedom to start a small business and to compete on a level playing field. So it's these smaller companies, internet companies that are trying to compete with like a YouTube or a Google, and they're thinking that net neutrality has a solution for these companies, but really it has absolutely nothing to do with it.
So this is the flip side of the previous fear. Instead of fearing large monopolies, now we're worried about the small businesses that would be victimized by the large monopolies that have the fast lane access. So what we have to do first is explain this fast lane, slow lane rhetoric garbage. What we're really talking about here is something called edge caching, which is the ability for a company that has customers, all over the country or all over the world to have a server near them that they can get access to so they can have faster connectivity. So users in New York connecting to a server in California are going to have a much slower connection than users in California. So if Google couldn't edge cache, then everyone outside of California would have a much worse user experience, obviously, using Google. So to solve that, they edge cache, and that means they put servers in locations all over the country, all over the world, so that people in those regions can hit those local servers for faster access.
In the ISP's facilities. they put a server in.
That's the next step. So what's better than edge caching just in a location is to actually take one of your servers that you pay for yourself, and you even pay the ISP to rent a space in their server room, and you put your server right there. And what that does is it eliminates even the distance between the ISP's network and wherever you've edged cached, and it actually gives you, direct access to your customer base, serving your customers better. Edge caching is a good thing. It is required for the internet to work as fast as it does now. For all the services that we depend on to be as quick and as responsive as they are now, edge caching is mandatory.
And anybody that's pro net neutrality will point at that and say that that's an unfair advantage for large companies.
Yes, it is expensive to get precious, coveted server space inside of an ISP's server room on their kind of backbone, obviously.
But there's a solution for that.
Exactly. So now that we kind of know what edge caching is and why it benefits large companies that need to have customers all over, now we talk about, well, now a small business needs a way to compete, needs a way to get into those fast lanes, so to speak. Services already exist. Services created by the free market with no help from the government, no help from net neutrality or regulation. Things like Cloudflare. You pay basically a small monthly fee, and you can set your website up to be edge cached by this Cloudflare service. And what this allows small businesses to do is sort of group together to pay for a service that gives them the edge caching capability. So we already have solutions to give small businesses with small pocketbooks the same edge caching capabilities as the large companies. So again, we have a situation where there is a fast lane in place, and capitalism, the free market, has already provided smaller competitors access to this fast lane.
People are believing that net neutrality is going to solve this problem of it's going to help out the small business. But what is really a very bad consequence of net neutrality is that these lobbyists who can make these politicians who can make these laws, who can decide what net neutrality really is, they're up to the highest bidder. So who's going to really win out and whenever net neutrality is passed is these large companies that have enough money to put pressure on the politicians to do their bidding, basically.
Yeah, when you give government control over something, you're also giving the lobbyists sway over it. Mm-hmm. You can't have one without the other.
So it's really having the opposite consequence of what people are looking for.
Yep.
It's really going to help out the larger companies and leave the small companies behind.
Yep. So next up is freedom of speech. A lot of people are concerned that ISPs might throttle traffic to websites that are critical of like the ISP itself, or ideas or politics, or things like, let's say, net neutrality that the ISP may or may not be for. So
maybe even anarchism.
First of all, again, in the unregulated wild west internet that we have today, this isn't happening. The throttling that does occur is on things that are bandwidth intensive that imbalance their networks. So some customers use up a disproportionately large amount of bandwidth, which the customers that aren't using as much have to pay for and subsidize the high bandwidth users. So they try and throttle things like BitTorrent, which makes up a large portion of their traffic. And then we get into talking about YouTube and Netflix, which is, some of the major traffic sources on the internet. So they don't currently throttle content like this. And that has to be said. So in the Wild West that we have now, we don't have the situation that people are calling for this regulation to fix. So we're fixing a problem that doesn't really exist right now. Second of all, if a major ISP like AT&T or Comcast blocked sites criticizing them or criticizing certain political ideas, it would surely, it would just explode on the internet. It would be one of the biggest stories ever for a long time. There's something called the Streisand effect, which I'm sure everybody on the internet has heard about. Basically, it's Barbara Streisand sued some people to try and keep them from publishing photos of something that she didn't want. I think it was her
Miami house.
Yeah. So she wanted to kind of get photos off the internet of her house, and it had the exact opposite effect. The story blew up. Everyone knew about it. The same thing would happen with these ISPs.
It would be on the front page of Reddit.
Exactly. AT&T blocks website critical of whatever. Now everyone flocks to this website to read all the criticism about AT&T, the exact opposite of their intended effect. It would be silly for them to do this, and they don't now, and they most likely would never do something like that.
Right.
Also, talking about freedom of speech, considering the government, and this is a serious accusation we can get into in another video.
Let's talk about their wonderful track record here.
Yeah. So, like, the government's primary role in the internet's history thus far has been to literally convert it into the largest, most invasive, privacy-destroying platform in the history of humanity. And I say convert because people need to be aware now, and this is a separate topic, that the internet is not the free space of information sharing that it used to be. It has been converted into the world's largest spy network ever. The most effective, efficient spying tool any government has ever had and may ever will have. So the thought of running to the government in the hopes of having your freedoms protected is insane. It's silly. The government has a horrible track record of, and really isn't even in the business of protecting these things that people call rights. And their track record on the internet proves that they are the worst of the options to run through or to run to.
So there's several examples of this. One of them was like an article that you were reading before where the government wanted to put backdoors in many of the websites that we use, like Facebook and all that, so they can just easily get into all our information with no problem. And they're doing that through regulation. Another example is, not in this country, but it's not out of the realm of possibility, is in Britain they have these programs called Slipstream and Gateway, where they were using the internet to sway public opinion and get make people believe certain things just through the internet, just through increasing page views on on their websites and screwing the opposition over.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's like you can't trust what the government can do whenever you know what their abilities are.
Yeah, exactly. And this just happened. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's awesome that you brought that up. The FBI just introduced legislation that will force companies to create backdoors. So if it passes, all companies will have to create backdoors in communication platforms that will allow governments access, which would be disastrous because any backdoor purposefully left in there for the government is a wide open, like, blinking red arrow, hack me here to all the nefarious people that would use it for evil.
So the last point is the freedom to visit any website at the fastest browsing speed. They believe that net neutrality is going to help you to always get the speed that you paid for on whatever website you visit.
Yep, and they're going to do this by forcing ISPs to make all websites equal. So this sounds like such a great thing, but technically speaking, and if you really kind of think down the line, down the trail to where it will lead, and the technologies that are coming out, this could be a bad thing. So the first thing I want to describe is the opposite case. So instead of somebody worried about accessing all websites equally and make sure the speed isn't limited to any websites, let's talk about a case where it would be a good thing. So let's say the free market and competition decides that a small ISP starts up with the idea of serving low-income families, families that don't have a large budget for a monthly internet bill. So the ISP's business plan is to offer limited access to the large bandwidth portions of the web. So they may slow down YouTube, they may block Netflix, they may block what's another good one example?
Hulu.
So yeah, they may block Hulu. And in exchange, because their users are now going to be using such little bandwidth, they're going to provide dirt cheap internet access to the poor, people that couldn't afford it otherwise. And I know people that can't afford that, they can't do that. And so they're looking for the cheapest, lowest internet. They don't care about videos. They don't care about Hulu. They want to be able to get their news, check their email for work. They want their kids to be able to do their homework. And they want to get on with their life so that they can have money to spend to maybe take their kids to Disneyland that year or whatever.
Or eat.
Yeah, or eat. Yeah. So there is use cases where the free market could provide solutions tailored to people's needs in a way that wouldn't be network neutral. And that would be a good thing. We need this freedom. People that don't want that, people that don't want their stuff to be throttled or websites blocked, can pay for it. And we do now, and we will be able to in the future. And it's not like they're going to raise rates. If we could just have some competition, this would all go away. This would not be a problem.
The way that people who are pro net neutrality are phrasing this is that the ISPs are forcing you to have slower connections to these websites. But really, what we want is them to provide options to people.
Exactly. Choice. Yes. Give us choice.
Yes.
And competition forces them to give us the choice that we want, just like they did with cell phones and minutes and
that's a problem.
Mobile calling.
There's a problem with the way that they're thinking.
Yeah, they used to charge per text message. People hated that. It was silly. Now they don't do it anymore. Most text plans are unlimited, right? Yeah. So, also, now here's another interesting way. If you kind of take this this forced net neutrality kind of thought process to the end, is what if there's certain types of internet traffic that should be given priority? What would that be? There's something called the Internet of Things, where all these smaller devices are now getting internet connectivity. What about a pacemaker? What about a pacemaker that needs to report in the condition of a patient? I think that traffic should probably be given priority over my Facebooking, right?
Definitely.
I don't think many people would argue with me on that. I think that there should be fast lanes, and certain content should be given access to that fast lane above and beyond other traffic. Pacemakers is just the first example that came to mind.
Sorry, the funny thing is that the government thinks that's ridiculous because currently, because the government is these local governments are making deals with ISPs to have only that ISP in their city. Mm-hmm. They're given better internet speeds than the people, the citizens within the city. So obviously they think they deserve higher speeds than anybody else.
Yep. So in that case, with like a pacemaker that needs fast lane access, one of two things is going to happen. Network neutrality would block that from even being a possibility, or they would carve out exceptions. They would get some lobbyists together, they would get some regulators together, and they would start carving out exceptions and creating these fast lanes anyway. Once it's possible to regulate something like this, once they've created fast lanes, then it now becomes a discussion of whether or not there should be fast lanes, because in this situation, I can almost guarantee you some legislators are going to pass this, because if they don't, they're old people pacemaker killing evil people. Right. So they're going to pass exceptions. The only question is who is going to control the exceptions that get passed. Right. The answer is always the same with the government: politicians and lobbyists.
Yeah. Who has the most money?
So do you really think the internet will be safe from lobbyists and corporatism once you give them the keys to this regulation? Absolutely not. It's absurd to think so, because it's never happened in the history of government. Yeah. It just doesn't work that way.
Completely insane.
So that's kind of the end of the 4 big points. Right. There's so much that we can't cover in a short video like this.
So just a quick rant, just to attack just the foundation of people's thinking. So everyone claims that they want a free internet. Well, the internet is free to some degree right now without net neutrality. You're able to view and say whatever the hell you want, just maybe not at the speeds you would like. If net neutrality is passed, the internet will no longer be free. It will open the government to decide what is kept or shown on the internet. So everyone wants to blame the ISPs for not making the internet free, but you have to understand that they're not making the internet any less free. The ISPs are not even selling you internet. They're selling you a connection to the internet. So you have to realize that the true enemy in the room, and the one who has got the gun and is about to pull it out, is the government. The government is the one who wants to control, and they are the ones that want to mold and modify the internet until you don't even know what the word free means anymore.
If they really cared about our rights, if they really cared about our freedoms, we would not be where we are today with the NSA. Snowden wouldn't be hiding out in a foreign country, afraid to come home.
Yeah. He wouldn't be in Russia. Julian Assange wouldn't be in an embassy right now.
So, in conclusion, again, we make this case in much more detail in our other video. click the link, check it out if you really want to get informed on this issue. But just to cover a quick solution before we call it, this monopoly that we have on that last mile is the crux of the issue. It is the source problem created by allowing government to get involved in the situation. If you bust that monopoly, which the government is supposed to be protecting us from, again, as monopolies, but in this case, they've helped create one. Yes. These local governments making deals with ISPs to come in and give internet service for their area, grants, licensing fees, high barriers to entry, litigious stuff. All this stuff's covered in our other video. The point is, you break this last mile monopoly, all this other stuff falls in line. You don't need to worry about fast lanes and slow lanes if you have 10 ISPs that you could call right now and give the same amount of money for unfiltered speed. If there were 15 ISPs that I could call right now, you think AT&T would risk throttling my connection, would risk blocking websites that they disagreed with? They would lose me in an instant, but they don't have to right now because of a monopoly that already exists, and that's what we need to get rid of. We need to get rid of the government in this equation, not create more of it.
And there's plenty of people out there that want to blame the ISPs, and there is some blame that can go towards them, but you got to understand that they're a company, and a company's purpose is to make money and make as much money as possible. You can't blame them for that. That's what a company is supposed to do. And so whenever they find a situation where they can make the maximum amount of money possible, which is making a deal with the government, they're going to take that. They're going to take that and run with it. The problem is that the government even got into that deal in the first place. Why did they stab everybody in the back just to have the fastest internet in that city and make some money and to give that ISP priority in that city?
Corporatism exists because there's power in the government to be controlled by the people in business. And if businesses aren't attempting to have their fair share of their own lobbyists, if a company isn't hiring its own lobbyists to compete against other companies' lobbyists, then they're losing in the marketplace.
Yeah, their competition is.
So
yes.
That's the solution. If you want to find more about it, please watch our other video.
Yes. There's a lot of information in there.
Yep.
Really good information.
So thanks for watching. We will, because this is probably one of the most important issues of our time, we're going to make a point. If there are any more counter arguments, please raise them in a non-troll-like fashion in the comments below. And we will make follow-up videos until we have covered everything we need to cover.
Definitely.
This is a critical issue. We need to get this understood by more of the general public.
Yeah, we're very passionate about this issue, and you should be too. And with that passion, you really need to understand what's really happening behind the scenes, because your passion could be steered in the wrong direction.
Yep. All right. Thanks for watching.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. How's it? Oh, that was weird. I was clapping.
You always have clapping difficulties. Like, remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good times. All right.
All right.